Thank you very much, Holly. Well, as one of the previous speakers, you have heard a lot now about the multilingual digital single market, and clearly, as previous speakers have noted, I think the multilingualism in Europe is a gift. I believe that also. It's a great environment to have a lot of cultural diversity, and the cultural diversity is expressed in language. Now, the market, when you're trading with people and doing business with each other, is where the rubber hits the road. This is where you have to sort of communicate, and this has actually happened in Europe before. It was called the Roman Empire. People did trade with each other, but they had to resort to a common language, which at the time was Latin. And we know how the story ended. It ended with a great divide socially, because the people who couldn't speak it, the farmers, were disenfranchised. There was difficulties between the people who didn't speak this common language of the business folks, and of course that created a number of social difficulties later on. We don't want to see that happen. We had a wonderful presentation this morning about how agreeing on a common language is an important, impossible task. It's also an unreasonable or unpractical task. If you try to find out how many people speak English in particular well enough in Europe to communicate and do business with each other, it is on average only between 30 and 40%. There is a great deal of variability between different languages, the different countries, but nevertheless, as a common language, it's not possible. So we would be repeating the same problem and the same difficulty of the Roman Empire. Now, if we do, luckily, we now live in an age where we have technologies that can actually bridge this, and that's unprecedented. We're living in a fantastic age where it's actually possible to build automatic machines that overcome these barriers or these boundaries between languages. And that's never happened before in human history. So it's just really exciting to be alive. And I want to walk you through some of the things that are currently being done. First of all, it's important to realize, though, that language doesn't express itself only in text. Much of the discussion today was about text, and when we think about text, we always assume it is well-formed, nicely written text, as in newspapers, but in reality, when we walk around and when we're traveling and when we're interacting with people, it really takes on many different forms. We speak with each other, we have communication problems in speech. Sometimes language is only visible in pictures or video, like in road signs, for example. I took this picture in China, by the way, which is very amusing about, it says no entry for tourists. Of course, if you come, you can't even read this. And then, of course, if you use social media and email and all the modern media and technologies, then you realize that even in one language, the language isn't as sanitized and as standardized as you might think. We all know from our children that the language that you produce has all kinds of acronyms. You have happy birthday and see you and let me know and lol, laugh out loud and so on. All these sorts of things that are an unstandardized language that makes all of that, of course, more difficult. And each language, once again, has specific variations on that. Now, most of where it's being done today in terms of spoken translation, it's done in the European Parliament in interpretation by human effort. And the question, of course, is what about the rest of us? How do the common people, how does a general population that does want to trade and do business in a single market communicate across languages? It's been a journey for me for many, many years. I started even in my graduate student and my undergraduate student life already dreaming about this idea of an interpreting machine that would translate speech. As you know, this has technical challenges. You need to master speech recognition to recognize what was said. Then you need to translate it, and you need to be able to articulate it in another language, and you have to do it in the other direction as well. The great challenge in this is the enormous ambiguity of languages. There are lots of jokes about the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak, the vodka is good, but the meat is rotten. But these ambiguities happen at all levels. They happen at the phonetic level in speech, they happen at the syntactic level and the semantic level. So how do we deal with this? Our technology has learned to deal with this, and it's largely through two things. We deal with ambiguity by representing everything stochastically. We don't say absolutely that we recognize something. We assign probabilities. And in order to do these probabilities, we have to have learning algorithms. And this, therefore, the importance of machine learning. Now, this has been going on for a while. And so hence, these technologies depend critically on the availability of data and computing. And this is where the good news is in a way, because data and computing constantly increases. This is, in fact, what we see. When I started with my research adventure there in the early 90s on building the first speech translator, these were tiny systems on the fastest computing you could get that now you have much more in your smartphone than we had back then. Neural networks, statistical systems, these are all systems that are now being praised a great deal today. We actually built them and used them already in the late 80s, except much, much smaller, much, much less data. And it's only now that we're seeing the great performance and the great advantage of these methods simply by hitting them with a ton of data and with lots and lots of computing. So, as you see in the slides, we are still using the same networks that we used in the late 80s, but of course with a lot more data, with a lot more computing, and statistical models as well. So if we look at this, we can make a prediction. We can see that this trend will continue. We will see that with more data, more computing, we can do ever more powerful things in this space and begin mastering this challenge of language communication despite all of these ambiguities and these challenges. I'd like to show you also this slide, just data, for example. We now use in the systems that we train more data, about twice or 3 times as much data as a human being will have uttered in their lifetime. So already by consuming the data on the internet, we're using way more data than humans ever actually produce. And hence, the news is good that eventually we will be able to do this by machines. Now, the technology is one element. I'd like to also walk you through a few things to just raise your awareness of the scientific challenge not being the only challenge. Because the other challenge is simply practical. We need to be able to create platforms in Europe that enable people who are not experts, for the experts to work on these machines to make them better, but also for the non-experts to take advantage of them and use them to build applications and developments. These have to be sustained, they have to be maintained and supported so that this venture can move forward. Appropriate deployments. Not all technology is built the same way. Some of them need to run on a mobile phone, some need to be on a stationary platform, some have to be embedded on phones, some can be cloud-based, some have to be online in real time, some can be operating in offline mode. All of this, again, dictates different technical solutions that we've been working with and developing. And then finally, tech insertions. How do you deliver applications into society so that the language bridges are really realized, that we really overcome these language barriers when they occur in different situations. And so that needs to be effective for the different human situations and account for the human factors in each of these situations. So let me, for the rest of the few minutes that I have, just show you a few of the examples of what we mean. So over the years, we developed pocket translators, for example, like things that you can download on iPhones. This was by way of a startup company we did called JIBBIGO. It was an embedded solution where you can have a speech translator running on a phone that you download and then communicate with people in different countries. Economists, I can't resist, since we have someone from Economists with us, called it the most sophisticated technology, currently belongs to JIBBIGO in 2013. It was arguably unique because it ran actually on the phone, and that makes it possible then to bring it, for example, into humanitarian situations where you don't have internet, where you can't really rely on a network infrastructure for server-based solutions. So this is what we did also over the years. We had humanitarian deployments where we used these on iPads or tablets, brought them into remote areas where doctors would engage with the local population and carry on dialogues on medical relief situations. We are currently discussing in Germany about refugee problems, creating technology for that purpose. In all of those cases, you have a situation where integrating people really involves language. Elderly, migrant workers, relief workers, it is a European problem, and again, by these field tests that we did in various countries, we could show that this is actually possible. We did this in Cambodia, in Honduras, and in various parts of the world. In all cases, you see that communication becomes possible through these means. Another form of deployment is when you do media subtitling. So not everything is when you're going into the field and need to be offline. Sometimes you're just watching the media online, and then hence a server-based delivery is perfectly okay. We have to deal with more complex vocabulary in this case, but sometimes, depending on situation, we have to deal with simultaneous real-time environments, and we have to deal with very specialized vocabularies in unlimited domains. So here's where we had the opportunity with a large integrated project funded by the European Commission called UBridge, Bridges Across the Language Divide, that involved a number of partners in Europe, all top laboratories on the technical side, but also people engaged in the delivery and in the insertion of these technologies in society. So I don't have time to walk you through all this scientific efforts that we did, but suffice it to say that out of the project came an infrastructure that is essentially a server-based infrastructure where you have top-of-the-line speech recognition and machine translation algorithms for the languages of Europe and different use cases through a web server architecture that is available to application developers as well as to scientists. We tested this infrastructure on particular use cases that we field tested and to assert success of this in practical situations, and evaluated it also in the field conditions with the stakeholders, with the practical deployment partners that we were working with. Also, there was a UBridge user portal. You can access this. If you'd like to play your own audio, video files through this, you can take advantage of these technologies. There are APIs to connect these things, so if people want to build applications, this is now possible. Particular deployment scenarios that were field tested were in particular with a partner called Red Bee Media. They are doing all the transcription and subtitling work for the BBC. They had a very successful experience plugging together the various technologies to automatic subtitling of WeatherView and of Sky News. We thought WeatherView would be an easy task because what can you say about the weather, particularly in UK? But we found out that it was actually a much richer type of conversational style than we thought, so it still presented challenges to do. But we had, in the end, successful performances that Red Bee is now continuing doing this in a commercial setting and actually putting additional funds into this to run with it, to actually streamline their workflow and their processes. We also worked with Euronews in 8 different languages to do automatic transcription of news in Euronews, as well as the translation into other languages. So a number of successful outcomes were also demonstrated in this case. In this particular case, also language identification came to bear because you want to know which language was spoken before you do it. And then, of course, the performance assessed. Now, next use case, lectures. This is something that we also have done a great deal of work with. Is lectures are particular because they're not well prepared. Usually in universities, people talk off the cuff. And it has special vocabularies that are more complex because they're specialized to a subject matter. There were several deployments here also. One particular one runs in Karlsruhe right now. It is a lecture translator that foreign students, when they come to Germany, they have difficulty following a German lecture, and the discussion always comes, should we all do all of our lectures in Karlsruhe in English? But that would be shameful for a German university. Why not? And also not doing justice to the German students. And so here we're actually practicing what we're preaching in a deployed solution. We're in the main auditorium of University of Karlsruhe. We have an online service that runs continuously on lectures that are being presented in German and simultaneously translated into English. Now, the system isn't perfect, and for some speakers it works better than for others, but overall, students report that they have a successful experience and that it actually helps them for the lectures. Again, it's web-based and client-based, so what the students do, they don't need any special devices, as you see in the bottom picture. They sit in their lecture room with their own laptop or smartphone or tablets, and they simply go to a website through the browser, and on the website, the web page comes up, and then you see the simultaneous subtitling of what this lecturer says at that moment, and the translation into English. This has, of course, raised a lot of attention in Germany. We just had recently very good media coverage by Spiegel and Frankfurter Allgemeine and Die Zeit, who reported on this experience and on the students' experience. Now, last use case I want to mention is, what about in the case where you really do have a lot of human interpreters, where the top of the line human effort is being practiced in the European Parliament. We developed a great relationship with the Interpreting Directorate of the European Parliament, and the question we were asking ourselves, can technology, as we produce it, support even the human interpreters? We did this gingerly, because we, of course, don't want to give anyone the feeling that the technology is A, good enough, nor that we have the ambition to somehow replace the wonderful effort of the interpreters. They are truly doing an amazing job in getting all the nuances and the details of speeches in the parliament correctly to enable this communication at the parliamentary level. But nevertheless, we had wonderful opportunities to give presentations with automatic interpretation in the parliament and rectors' conferences in 2012 and 2014 to illustrate what is possible today in terms of doing simultaneous automatic interpretation by machine. The reaction by the interpreters was in the cabinet of the parliament. We had the feedback that they were both relieved that it wasn't good enough to propose any threat to the interpreters, at the same time encouraged that now there are tools available that complement the efforts of the human interpreters. So in UBridge, we thought about 3 different use cases where we could support, not even think about replacing, but support, make the effort of the human interpreters better and easier. And we came up with 3 interesting solutions that were tested together with the Interpretation Directorate of the Parliament. As I said here, these pictures show that we developed a great relationship with the Directorate, who has been enormously supportive in helping us walk through what their task and their effort actually is. We found 3 things. One is terminology is a big stress for human interpreters, because they need to learn the special terms of the speaker. And as you see in the right picture here, this is a scratch pad of a human interpreter after the presentation. It's mostly named entities and numbers that an interpreter has to note. And then, of course, beforehand, they have to figure out what the special terms and terminology of that lecture is. So we developed 2 tools. One is a named terminology preparation tool, which goes through automatically through the website of the agenda, looks up all the special terms. These are all technologies that we've developed as part of the speech translation effort, and plug that into something that the human interpreter can actually have access to and look at in an on-demand basis to help their task. Again, it wasn't directly speech translation, but it was a side effect or a byproduct of these technological efforts. Again, thanks to the basic research, we came up with a new innovation here that, in fact, is solving problems. Named entities, tracking names, numbers, time expression, and so forth, a crucial thing we can automatically track to create a memory automatically for the interpreters as they do their task. And then finally, we've identified, in fact, one area where interpreters told us they would welcome automatic speech translation or speech interpretation even, which is in voting sessions. Voting sessions are stressful because you get the votes, you have to get the number of votes and the referendum number, etc., correct, but it's boring because it's just numbers and greetings and things like that. And so they would love to have a sort of a cruise control, and we called it affectionately the interpreter's cruise control, where if things get boring and simple, you engage an automatic system so the human interpreter can take a rest for the more challenging task ahead. Again, we had the chance to do a field test of this, and again, more work needs to be done to bring this fully to bear, but this is extremely encouraging, and we have a wonderful relationship there with the Parliament and see that as a great opportunity moving forward. So in conclusion, I think if we are thinking about a multilingual digital single market, we really must embrace the language challenge. We can't simply wait for somebody else to do it for us. We have to, language is a gift in Europe, we have to address it, we have to embrace it, we have to deal with it. Europe needs to rise to the challenge and do it aggressively. All it takes really is not necessarily even only money, but the will to succeed. Technology is ready to support citizens. I think we are at a stage where both the data, the computing, and the technology is coming to a point where we're demonstrating that it can be useful. And again, we have to be careful just to bring it to bear in the appropriate solutions so that it actually solves problems, that we don't just sit in ivory towers solving only the scientific issues, but really merge and marry the scientific issues with the practical deployments. Thank you.